Immediately said yes. And I'd have a little bio on her. Margaret was born and raised in the prairies. She moved to Quesnel in the late 80s where she met and married her husband Dan. Through Dan's career at the BC Forest Service, they moved to many places but knew they always wanted to end up in Port Alberni. Finally, her family got the opportunity through Dan's work to move to the Alberni Valley in 1998 from the Queen Charlotte Islands. Embarking on her funeral career in 2001, she started as a funeral director with the Chapel of Memories in 2003 and worked there until 2012. Margaret moved to Campbell River temporarily to help fill a maternity leave as the manager of Sutton's Funeral Home until early 2014. Returning to Port Alberni in the Chapel of Memories, she took the role of manager. When she is not working, she enjoys spending time with family and riding her motorcycle. And I asked Margaret to come speak here because I think she has amazing energy, and I'm assuming she's going to be a wonderful speaker, as she always is with everybody. And I think she has a unique profession, and she's here today to talk to us about the role of the Chapel of Memories in the community.
I want to thank you very much, Heidi. I'm actually going to turn the mic down because, of course, the gentleman said something about the hearing aids. So is this okay? Can you hear me now?
Just ignore.
Okay. So a lot of people know about the Chapel of Memories and the main role that we are, which is the funeral home. But there's also other roles that we fulfill in the community that a lot of people don't know about. And I really wanted to thank Heidi for actually giving me the opportunity of sharing those, roles that we do play. One of the roles that we do play, other than a funeral home, is we're also, at this point in time, we're also the coroner's transportation service. In small communities, the coroner's service actually goes and contracts funeral homes for transportation services because ambulance services and things like that do not carry deceased people. So basically, when there is the coroner called in for deaths, then we actually operate solely as the transportation service. What that means, our role is basically just to transport. We're not allowed to wear name tags. We're not allowed to drive a vehicle that has any sort of insignia on it, and we are not allowed to approach or talk to the family in any way, shape, or form. So if someone comes up and recognizes us, because our faces are recognizable after a number of years, we're not allowed to talk to the family unless the coroner is present, so that in no way, shape, or form can we sway the family. And that's our main role, is to do the transportation. That involves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. When we transport, it might be in the instance of from a person's place of passing at their home to the hospital, or from the hospital to autopsy and NRGH, or in some instances, the most interesting ones, sometimes we are accompanied by the RCMP in order to take the person over for a forensic autopsy over the landmine. So that's kind of one of the things that we do. Another one that we do, which is one of our roles in the community, is we have historical data on site. A lot of people do not realize that we have historical data dating all the way back to 1941. We have all of the funeral records all the way from Stephen's Funeral Home, which we do still get called Stephen's Funeral Home every once in a while, okay? And we actually have all of that historical data. We find a lot of people, especially during the summer months, that are coming to the valley because they're researching family trees. They'll come to us because they know that we have that data. The most memorable situation I had was that there was a family who had come looking for their family tree and their genealogical information, and I was able to actually provide an obituary notice for a family member that had passed away in the early 1980s. That was great. We also had another instance where a gentleman who was a member of the retired, or the Veterans RCMP organization here in town. They were putting together a project where they would recognize members of the RCMP who had died in their line of duty. And we were able to, by referencing our historical data, find out who the gentleman was, where his contact information was, where he was laid to rest, so that the Veterans Association could contact the gentleman's family and get permission to actually have his name added to a plaque that was actually placed on Parliament Hill, commemorating all the members that died in the line of duty. So that's kind of one of those things that we're really proud of, because we can help out in that way. Another thing basically is that when we were digitizing our records, it's rather interesting between the difference between now, where we're very politically correct and we're very accepting, and then there's back in the, say, 40s and 50s, when sometimes their record keeping was a little bit strange. When we're dealing with historical data, we deal with the person's legal name, their date of passing, their date of birth, who their parents are and where they were born, and then basically, you know, what their age was, what their race was, where their location of death was. And in digitizing all those records, sometimes we come across very interesting data. And the one that I am able to share with you is the one that basically it's become an office joke, because the cause of death that was listed on this historical record was Thursday, 10 a.m. So, being that it is Thursday and it's after 10 a.m., I can see obviously that you have not had that befall you yet, the cause of death being Thursday at 10 a.m. Sometimes when we've had a really hectic week, every once in a while, you know, you'll hear them out in the main office going, okay, dodged another one.
It's been touch and go sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, yeah. The other role that we have is one of educator. We try and give as much information as possible to people in the community, regardless of what role you are, because we want to make sure that you make the educated decisions. Regardless of which funeral home you go to, we want to make sure that you have the information to make the decision that's best for you and your family. We find that a lot of times when we're dealing with families, they come to us with information that I know they got off the internet, and it pertains to other provinces or even other countries, and it's not something that is information that would actually help them out in their decisions. We want to make sure that everyone has the proper information to make your decision as easy as possible. The other thing as well is, as an educator and as educators in the community, we try and make sure that we're as approachable as possible. We're not that scary. We have an educational library that we have access to for any member of the general public that wants to come in and access it. We have also made educational libraries, actually portable ones, available to the Alberta Hospice Society, other community groups like the Compassionate Friends, so that they can access it to get information to help their members. The other thing, as part of education, the Alberta Valley Hospice Society gives their volunteers a course every year, and at the end of that course, we open our doors to them so they have the opportunity to come in and ask questions. And they ask the questions so they can get the answers and the information for the families that they serve. And again, we don't care which funeral home you use as long as you give the right information. A lot of times these volunteers feel comfortable enough to ask us questions that they wouldn't feel comfortable asking us in front of a family member. Or else they're getting the information so they can give to the family to better prepare the family when they eventually do come to us or come to the other funeral home. So that's kind of one of the other hats that we wear. Also, one of the other things we do is community support. One of the roles that a lot of people don't realize is that we are an information basis and a support network for when we have the disaster response exercises. And in cases of disaster response, a lot of times the teams that go in have to have special knowledge and information dealing with instances where, for an example, there is a large-scale disaster. We have the information, we have the knowledge, and so last year when they had the disaster exercise, we actually sat down with them and said, so, here are some of the instances that you might come across, and this is something that you might want to think of in that situation. Luckily, Port Alberni, we have in the disaster, the most recent disaster that we had, which was 1964, luckily we didn't have any fatalities. Of course, obviously, when you're dealing with other larger fatalities like Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami that hit in Boxing Day a number of years ago, that sort of thing, there were fatalities, unfortunately. And when you're dealing with that sort of situation, there are special ways that you must approach that situation and look at how to approach everything, identification, how to make sure that the situation that you're in with the amount of deceased people, that you handle that so that there are no sort of contagious diseases that are actually that actually come to fruition and affect the survivors. So that's some of those sort of things that we do. As I said, we have lots of different hats that we wear. And basically, the other thing that we do, of course, obviously me being in the room here, we force the conversation. Just by knowing what I do and who I am, people can feel comfortable with joking about our passing and joking about death. And that's kind of one of those things that is a good thing about what I do, is because even when I go to a certain place and people ask me, what do you do for a living? Of course, I say, I'm a funeral director. Well, then that inadvertently forces the conversation. We do usually get the off-the-cuff comments, and some of them are rather illegal and some of them are rather strange. But people feel comfortable talking and joking with me about it, as opposed to saying something to their own family members, which is uncomfortable, because we all kind of believe that if we don't talk about it, then it doesn't happen. And unfortunately it does. But it's one of those things where we can address the questions and say, well, you know, that might be really strange, and it might be, you know, something that you like, but did you really think that went through when you talked about just burying you in the backyard? And that's some of the things that I get. But basically, as I said, is that we wear so many different hats, and even though we are a funeral home, we're also part of the community. We're part of the people that you can come and talk to and ask questions of, and basically it's one of those things that we're not as scary as you think, and we're very approachable. But yeah, I basically, on behalf of Chapel Memories, I want to thank Heidi for asking me here and inviting me here. And I think at this point, does anybody have any questions or concerns or anything like that, other than, am I going to be a Rotary member?
When you were saying they bring you information that may not always be accurate.
Correct.
Are you talking about different burial rules or laws from place to place?
Yes. Sometimes what happens is that people come to us with stories that they have either heard or read, and sometimes when they do the information research, they'll Google it. And they'll get information about legalities that happen in Ontario or in the US. And so we have to kind of filter through them and say, okay, so this is what we're dealing with. And a lot of times the education comes with definition as well. The buzzword last year was green burial. And what's a green burial? And a family's definition of green burial versus the legal definition of green burial versus my own definition of green burial has to be looked at. And so that's kind of where we do with the information. A lot of times too, there's, depending on which cemetery you're dealing with and which area that you're dealing with, their legislation is different than Port Alberni. So, does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious what would be like a major difference. I mean, I'm not talking so drastic as New Orleans is buried above ground.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, just in Canada in general, what would be a difference between, say, here and Alberta?
So here in Alberta, actually, there's not that much of a difference other than just on the paperwork side, on the legislation side, on my side. As for families, not that different. There is different legislation when it comes to green burial, and we're seeing that more and more because of Royal Oak Burial Park down in Victoria. They do now have a green section and green burial down in Victoria.
Which
And
means?
Basically, green burial is that, for their definition, that when a person passes away, they are not embalmed or treated with any chemicals. That they are not, their place of passing or where they're laid to rest is not marked in any way, shape, or form. So the burial takes place, and it's in an area in the cemetery where it's just a field. You're not allowed to put a headstone in it. There are burial containers that are allowed, but they have to be of a natural fiber. There cannot be any metal in them.
So we're talking like biodegradable?
You got it,
Right.
exactly, yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah.
And
Any other
are there
questions?
different rules around, like, if you're in the water table and all that kind of stuff, if it's green versus a non-green? Or is it all the same there?
It also comes into, what also comes into play is the definition or the legislation of the cemeteries as well. For an example, there are some cemeteries that you must have a liner, yet there are other cemeteries that do not require a liner of any way,
Probably
shape, or
because of that water table or whatever.
It could be, yeah, yeah. Yes.
Your digital record, is there, or data records, is there a cost to doing research in your
No.
facility? Just come in and ask and.
So what
Basically-
happens is basically because some of those records, they do fall under the Freedom of Information Act. If you ask us for specific information, then we will go research it for you, but we don't allow people to have access to those records. We at one point did, because under the Freedom of Information Act, there is there's a restriction in the most recent years, but we did actually at one point let someone have access to the records, and luckily for us, we had already started digitizing those because those pages went missing. So, and I do know that there's a gentleman, sorry about that, he's been having his hand up.
Yeah, I have a sort of an unusual question.
Sure.
I read and I've seen these programs on TV. Has anything unusual happened in our local funeral home that's unexplainable?
G word.
See, I always get that. I always get that. You know, people
The
actually.
corpse was there a minute ago.
So when you're talking about unexplainable things, obviously you're talking about bump in the night and chains rattling and that sort of thing.
Or something that it's visible and or whatever, and it's not, you cannot explain it. It's unnatural, that's the
Okay.
thing.
Well, not that I can recall recently, but I do remember when I was very young and impressionable and I was an apprentice, I did actually go and, of course, obviously we operate 24/7, and I was called in to do a transportation, and I was doing the paperwork and everything like that, and it was 2:30 in the morning, and the funeral home is quiet, and I know I'm the only one there. And the calculator at the end of the desk started ripping off numbers and started spewing tape over and over and over and over and over again, and it kind of, it more than a little, it really unsettled me, and so I got up and yeah, and I grabbed the calculator, I threw it out in the hallway, and then I closed the door. Well, of course, my boss comes in the morning and he says, "Margaret, can you tell me why the calculator is out in the middle of the foyer?" I said, "Well, this is what happened," and he started to laugh because it was actually plugged into an older power outlet. And when the metal leg of the desk that I was working on and writing on hit it a certain way, it would actually send a jolt of power, and it would send a power surge that would cause it to go and do. Me, on the other hand, I just saw that this thing, I wasn't touching it, and I threw it out, and that was the end of it. So he made me put it back on the desk and plug it back in. And very soon afterwards, well, actually very soon, I'm talking a couple of years later, he asked where the calculator was, and I said, I have no idea where it went.
There was an accountant.
I don't know. But it didn't need to do that at 1:32 o'clock in the morning.
That's funny.
So, sorry, you had a question?
Cremation, is it becoming more and more popular all the time
Yes.
since we're
Yeah.
having land issues, et cetera?
I don't think it's land issues, to tell you the honest truth. I know that there are counterparts of mine in Ontario where the burial rate is still, 60 to 70%. We on the coast here, we're dealing with 80 to 90% cremation rate. I think a lot of it has to do with, and this is my own opinion, so please, it's my own opinion. We have a very transient population. So a lot of the people that are here in Port Alberni were not raised in Port Alberni, so there's no roots here, per se. And a lot of times people, the other thing is that at one point, Under the Catholic faith, the Pope did not recognize cremation, therefore it was forbidden for any Catholics to be cremated, so it had to be burial. And that kind of thing perpetuated through the rest of the Christian faith as well, is that it had to be burial. Again, coming down to the religious as well, there are certain people that are certain religious observations where they have to get cremated. The members of the East Indian Gurdwaras, whether they be Sikh or Hindu, that is their belief, is that they must be cremated. A lot of times too, it's cost. Some people want to be returned back to Ontario or Alberta or wherever they came from, where their family is. And the cost between shipping a set of cremated remains or bringing it back home and shipping a full body is quite a bit different. And if there's no religious observances that forbid you to get cremated, then that's an option. So that's kind of what I believe is. And of course, with the influences of people coming in from the Asian communities, where they believe that they have to get cremated, that's something that comes into play.
Are there any restrictions about transporting cremated remains across the world or across the country?
So if, say, for example, you were going to be flying to another place, then when you go onto the air carrier, you must have a container that is X-rayable. That can have access, so if the customs people and the security people decide that they need in, they will get in. But there is paperwork that basically you do have to carry with you that allows you to go through, and you must notify them that you have a set of cremated remains with you, or human remains, basically, so that they treat them with the dignity and respect that they deserve. It's not that onerous. I always suggest, though, and heavily suggest and heavily stress, please do not check your baggage.
Yeah, no.
It's got to be carry-on, because if you decide you're going to Ottawa, but the person you're taking with you decides to go to Florida, yeah, you don't want that to
Not
happen.
a good situation.
No.
It's not insurable.
No, exactly. There is no value you could put on that. So yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Margaret, it's my pleasure to thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
On behalf of the Rotary Club. I believe I heard what you said. I'm not quite sure. I used to always think that the comment that people would make when they ask you how you are, I'd always say, well, I'm on this side of the grass. I didn't realize that there was so much trouble worrying about the other side. Great problems. I don't know how many hats you're going to get down there. Fill in the space.
It's what we do.
Yes, indeed. It's more than I've ever thought that been involved in the business. And I think that you came here and told us a little bit more about it. By virtue of the questions, I'm sure everybody wants to know where they're going to go.
Well, of course, of course. Up or
So
down.
on behalf of the Rotary Club, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.